Hello, my name is Caleb Smith with the Rocket Miner newspaper, and I'm here to provide an update for August 9th, 2020. Now, it won't surprise most of you that I'm a book lover. I mean, there's been more than a few hints here and there along the way. Sometimes when I'm perusing some of my book sites looking for upcoming releases, I'm just so struck by a title that I'm sold right now. I want this book as soon as possible. And a recent example of that is Superman Smashes the Klan. And as excited as I was by this book, by learning that this book merely exists, I'm very happy to say that the story contained within is spectacular, surpassed my expectations. And that's why I'd like to talk about some of the topics it touches upon and recommend it to you today. Now, when I first ordered this book, I didn't realize this isn't a new Superman tale. This is a modernization of a past escapade. Back in 1946, the Adventures of Superman radio series started a 16-part series that introduced the Lee family, a bunch of Chinese immigrants that had recently moved to Metropolis, where they quickly meet Superman and his alter ego, reporter Clark Kent. Due to these interactions, we soon see the Man of Steel take on and beat the snot out of white supremacists. I love this book. Now, it takes place in the original 1946 setting, and I should note that the Klan reference is Klan with a C, Klan of the Fiery Cross. But if you look at the way they're dressed, if you look at their rituals, their symbols, like a burning cross, if you look at their hate speech, if you look at their despicable, unacceptable goals, we know we're talking about the Ku Klux Klan. There's no mistaking what kind of hates the subject in this case. As I said, set in 1946, we're still early on in Superman's career, and he's still partially struggling with both his identity and even his power set. It's partially a nod to the fact that over more than 8 decades of Superman stories, dozens and dozens of writers have added to the mythology. There are certain parts of the story that today we take for granted that just weren't there at the beginning. Back in Action Comics, we do see baby Kal-El, soon to be orphan of the planet Krypton, being set on a rocket and landing on Earth, where he displays powers greater than mere mortal man. Some of the things that that are part of the story today were added subsequently. The radio serial is credited with adding kryptonite, part of the mineral remains of his home planet, that can weaken, harm, and potentially even kill Superman. Other additions from the radio series include editor Perry White and the fact that Superman can fly. Maybe some people have even heard the old tagline, "More powerful than a locomotive, able to leap tall buildings in a single bound." That's because, as originally written, Superman had slightly more grounded powers. The author, Gene Lang, partially uses the struggle that Superman's facing kind of as a metaphor for the immigrant experience. We see Superman trying to figure out, what face do I put forward for the world? Do I fully reveal what I can do for fear that some people might push me away, might question my intentions? Should I keep some of myself hidden and not reveal what fully I can do? We see him talking to himself, of sorts, wrestling with do I focus on my humanity, the part that just makes me normal, and not take advantage of and even deny some of my natural talents? Or alternatively, do I lean into my heritage? And if I do that, does that mean that I need to fully put behind all the lessons and priorities that were taught to me by those who raised me? He's not the only one struggling with such things. The book also focuses on the perspective of Roberta Lee. She's the youngest child in the Lee family. She has a lot of things to deal with, which most kids do. She's dealing with the fact that she's moved to a new place. Personally, as a person who moved to more than a half dozen places when I was growing up, that does have an impact as you're trying to figure out, how do you connect with people? How do you make a strange, unknown place home? She's also dealing with younger sibling-itis. She has an older brother who very quickly becomes the part of the popular crowd wherever he's at and doesn't seem to struggle with some social things, whereas she often has trouble finding words when stressed, worried. And she's got extra stuff on her plate. Some of the racism she faces is minor, even accidental. Doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. Such as local kids making assumptions based on local media presentations, or using vocabulary that they don't recognize cuts so much to the heart. And then there are also some people who they're aiming to injure. The family very quickly wakes up to a burning cross on their yard and face verbal intimidation that quickly escalates to attempts to injure and straight up kill. And it's not just the Lee family that's a target of the Klan. We see Jewish people who are sometimes attacked. We see an African American officer who plays a prominent part in the story who is just looked down upon for having such indignant attitude to think that he could have such a position. We see a lot of hate and how people have to work to overcome it. One other character that I greatly appreciated is Chuck Riggs. He's a person who very quickly comes into conflict with the Lee family. They meet at a local baseball game on the invitation of Jimmy Olsen, who, in addition to being a Cub reporter and photographer for the Daily Planet, apparently manages a kids' baseball league in his free time. He invites the kids over, and Tommy Lee quickly impresses everybody, of course, with his pitching ability, which puts out Chuck, who was the previously unchallenged starting pitcher. A fight breaks out, and after multiple attempts to apologize that he refuses, he's kicked out the team. He goes home where he gives a kind of slanted version of what happened to his uncle. And his uncle decides that it's time to initiate his nephew into the Klan. He has the title of Grand Scorpion, which doesn't... Grand Scorpion, Grand Wizard, these are ridiculous titles and should always be laughed at. But choosing to focus his rage and the group's the Klan's attention on the Lee family, he quickly puts Chuck into situations where he has to make a choice about whether or not he's going to add to the harm or whether he's going to choose a different path. And in more than one case, he's quietly feeding information to both Superman and Clark Kent, trying to thwart kidnapping and bombing attempts, trying to keep people from being hurt. And these attempts kind of the Lees are starting to give him a second chance. Tommy's more forgiving than Roberta is at first, but there's still some tension. And at one point, he and Tommy are walking home, and they're having a conversation where Chuck's going, but why is it wrong to want to just hang out only with people who look like with you? Why are the divisions? Why shouldn't we have divisions? And this greatly upsets Tommy, and trying to go, are you telling me I need to go back to Chinatown? What are you trying to do? And he's trying to just talk it out loud because he's confused and he's conflicted. And at one point he just blurts out, I want to know that my family's not evil. Because what do you do when people you love, and you know they love you back, are also feeding you hate and giving you bad advice? And all families are imperfect, some more than others. And Chuck's trying to figure out what to do when, for a long time, it was just talk. It was just words. But now he's beginning to see how those words have impact, and they lead to action, and and the harm and the hurt and the pain that has on individuals in a community. And he's trying to figure out, what do I do in this case? I appreciate that because I the place where I did most of my public schooling, its hatred and its racism was a little bit closer to the surface than most places I've lived. And I know people who, even recently, are still struggling with those mixed messages and what personal responsibility they have. What do they choose to carry? What do they choose to emulate? What do they try to leave behind? The author himself includes a little section in the book about 2 stories that had great impact on his life. He talks about back in grade school, he'd written a G.I. Joe story that was so good the teacher read it, and all these people in class responded, and he remembered there was one kid who was particularly good at sports, gave him a thumbs up. And after class, he decided he was going to follow up with that and see, well, he seemed nice, he seemed positive, I want to say a little bit more. And when he reached out to him, the guy responded with racial epithets and shut him down on more than one level for a while. And the author also talks about a story that his father tells, that he'd come from China through Taiwan and eventually ended up in the United States and didn't have any local family or connections and was staying in a boarding house, and how another guy who was living there struck up a friendship. And even though English wasn't his father's first language, they slowly started to get to know each other. And at a time when he felt alone, this guy invited him to join him and his family for his holiday, where he felt embraced and where he felt loved. And he said, his father said, that was when I started to feel less lonely over the holidays. One of the questions that this book answers, or talks about, is the how do you address racism? You just can't punch it into submission. Going back to the radio series, they quote one of the episodes where Superman, in the guise of Clark Kent, is talking to Jimmy Olsen. And he says, "The Klan of the Fiery Cross is made up of intolerant bigots. They don't judge a man in the decent American way by his own qualities. They judge him by what church he goes to and by the color of his skin. And tolerance is a filthy weed," he continues. "The only way to get rid of it is by hunting out the roots and pulling them out of the ground." It's not enough just to simply not add to the negativeness. It's even if you don't engage in some of the both quiet and more overt ways to be biased, to be racist. That's not enough. A good gardener doesn't only doesn't limit themselves to just not sowing weeds, but if there are weeds within reach, it's incumbent upon them to reach them out. Whether it's a joke that's quietly whispered, whether it's a person that's being put down, if you hear it, if you see it, it's part of our responsibility to challenge it. We don't have any Superman sweeping out of the sky, but we can learn from the lesson of an immigrant who aspired to the best ideals out there, as it's given a noble start by 2 Jewish writers who were familiar about what the consequences are of hatred and persecution. America in 1946 had just one big war, and we're still looking to have a double victory by having a new start with greater rewards, greater possibilities for what people came next. And one thing that I found a bit painful reading it was reading the part of the postscript by Mr. Lang, written in 2019, stressing that, and we're not there yet. We haven't achieved that double victory for everyone. And I think of some of the things that have happened over the last few months that demonstrate that not everybody's treated equally, how there's still discrepancies in sentencing and job opportunities, and there are still weeds out there that need to be plucked. And stories like this inspire us to do better and to look upwards. And in addition to this fictional story that Mr. Lang shared with us. I liked one other bit he had at the end, where he talked about how where he went back to those two stories he had. He said when he thinks about the future and the potential and what needs to be pursued, he doesn't focus on the story where there was the guy who just hurled hatred at him with his words. He said he prefers to focus on the story of his dad and his friend, who 5 decades since they first met, they're still in touch, they're still close, they're still holding each other up. And at this point, they're celebrating how far they've gone. That's the type of thing that the author says that we should be focusing on. That's what we should be continuing to mirror and replicate as much as we can. I'm Caleb Smith with the Rocket Miner newspaper, wishing you a good day and a safe tomorrow.